Malaysia will transition to the endemic phase of COVID-19 on April 1st, with all restrictions on business operating hours removed and prayer activities allowed without physical distancing. In a nationwide address, Prime Minister Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri Yaakob says the transition to the endemic phase is an exit strategy that would allow Malaysians to return to near normal life after nearly 2 years of battling the pandemic. He says that this is also a temporary phase before the country moves to the endemic phase, which can only be announced by the World Health Organization. Malaysia will also reopen its borders on April 1st as it seeks to revive her economy, especially the tourism sector, which has been the hardest hit by the pandemic. Ismail Sabri said the decision was made based on the latest scientific evidence and facts related to COVID-19 and comparing the requirements for the reopening of borders by other countries, which he says makes Malaysia an open destination and accessible to all. Under the relaxed COVID-19 rules and standard operating procedures from April 1st, the wearing of face masks in public places is still mandatory. However, restrictions on business operating hours are abolished, which means that restaurants and convenience stores previously operating around the clock may do so again. Prayers and religious activities may be conducted without physical distancing. Interstate travel will be allowed for all regardless of vaccination status, while limits on the number of people allowed in the workplace based on vaccination coverage is abolished. While the use of the MySejahtera app is still mandatory, it is exempt at open areas that are not crowded, while MySTrace is required for indoor events with a large number of guests. In regards to the reopening of borders, Malaysians with valid travel documents can now enter and exit the country as usual, while foreign nationals do not need to apply for the MyTravel Pass, which is being abolished, and instead will just need to download the MySejahtera app. However, while those who are fully vaccinated and boosted will not need to undergo quarantine, they will need to undergo the COVID-19 RT-PCR test 2 days before departure and a professional RT-KAG test within 24 hours of their arrival into the country. The transition to the endemic stage was originally planned for last year, but it was put off following the increase in COVID-19 cases due to the Omicron variant and the devastating floods in December. Ismail Sabri says that while the number of new daily COVID-19 cases has increased dramatically thanks to Omicron, severe cases are still low at 0.7%, while the number of patients requiring intensive care unit treatment and monitoring remains under control. As it stands, 98.7% of the country's adult population had received 2 doses of the COVID-19 vaccine, while 64% had received their booster dose. Top Glove Corp has postponed its plans to raise $347 million in a Hong Kong listing due to elevated market uncertainty due to the ongoing Russian-Ukraine crisis, its managing director told Reuters. Datuk Lee Kim Miao told The Wire that due to the changing developments in the industry and the current equity market conditions, the group decided to give itself more time to pursue this exercise in Hong Kong. In a statement, the company said that it is not in a hurry and that its decisions are always for the long-term benefit of the group and its stakeholders. The glove maker, which had benefited from the demand for disposable gloves during the COVID-19 pandemic, has a primary listing in Kuala Lumpur and secondary in Singapore and had planned the HKEX listing to broaden its investor base. To recap, Top Glove shareholders had approved the dual primary listing on the HKEX. The resolutions comprise the proposed issuance of new shares up to 793.5 million of new Top Glove shares, which included an additional 103.5 million new shares, which may be issued under the over-allotment option if exercised in full. The earlier target for the HKEX listing had been the first quarter of 2022. Top Glove share price closed 1.58% down today at RM1.87. Crude palm oil price, which has reached a supernormal high recently of more than 8,000 ringgit a tonne, has hit a peak and is expected to decline further in the near term, barring further crises. Malaysian Palm Oil Board DG Datuk Dr. Ahmad Parviz Ghulam Kadir says the board had expected CPO price to hover around 7,000 a tonne, owing to a recent Indonesian policy that mandates palm oil producers to sell a fifth of their output to domestic refiners at fixed prices, but the The Russia-Ukraine crisis had boosted CPO price to supernormal levels. Speaking at the 2022 Palm and Lauric Oil Conference, Ahmad Parviz observed that over the past few days, the price of CPO has already retreated to below 7,000 a tonne. He believes that the price will maintain above 5,000 ringgit a tonne for the next few months, given the uncertainties over how long the Russia-Ukraine crisis will last. Consumers have rushed to source for CPO following a shortfall in sunflower oil because of the crisis, pushing the March CPO futures contract 712 ringgit higher to 8,163 ringgit a tonne. The Ministry of Plantation Industries and Commodities recently said Malaysia, as the world's number one exporter of palm oil, must strive to maintain good value, among others, through the introduction of new applications for the use of the oil. The MPIC is also in the midst of working on a targeted subsidy for cooking oil, which is expected to be finalised by year-end. Malaysia attracted a record amount of approved investments worth 306.5 billion in the manufacturing, services and primary sectors in 2021, according to the Malaysian Investment Development Authority. This was driven by higher foreign direct investment and increased projects in the manufacturing and electrical and electronics sectors. In a statement, MIDA said that Malaysia's FDI of 208.6 billion accounted for 68.1% of total approved investments, with the remaining 31.9% coming from domestic direct investment at 97.9 billion ringgit. Year on year, Malaysia's FDI was significantly higher by 224.9% from 64.2 billion in 2020. However, DDI declined marginally by 5.13% from 103.2 billion the year before. The Netherlands, Singapore, the People's Republic of China, Austria and Japan accounted for 88.9% of total FDI approved in the manufacturing, services and primary sectors. Pulau Pinang recorded the highest investments approved last year, followed by Kedah, Kuala Lumpur, Selangor and Sarawak. These five states contributed 79.6% of total approved investments in 2021. Officiating MIDA's annual media conference was Senior Minister and International Trade and Industry Minister Datuk Seri Muhammad Azmin Ali, who said the record-breaking approved investments for the manufacturing, services and primary sectors were an 83.1% jump from 2020. Azmin says that MIDA has already secured 352 projects in the pipeline, with proposed investments of 39.2 billion ringgit for the manufacturing and services sectors. Azmin says these projects will create more than 19,000 new job opportunities for the rakyat. The High Court had on Tuesday dismissed an originating summons by Dynamic Holdings for an injunction to be imposed on Ernst & Young Consulting to restrain it from sharing any findings or opinions of its special independent review with Bursa Malaysia or other parties. This comes after the beleaguered oil and gas group argued that the firm is not a qualified auditor. Justice Datuk Ahmad Fairuz Zainul Abidin, in his broad grounds in dismissing Dynamic's application, ruled that EY Consulting had taken steps to ensure the team performing the SIR included a qualified auditor, namely Muhammad Sharizal Abdul Rahim, a partner in E&Y. Justice Ahmad Fairuz in his decision also said EY Consulting did not misrepresent itself to Dynamic in its letter of engagement, as the firm did not in any manner claim to be an auditor. He said that the appointment of EY Consulting was also after negotiations were carried out, and as such, all work products of EY Consulting were also validly produced, including the fact-finding update that Dynamic seeks to prevent dissemination of in its originating summons. Justice Ahmad Fairuz also ordered Dynamic to pay 20,000 ringgit cost to EY Consulting.